Guard the broken 50, old-timer. Maybe you two can keep each other company. Do not order another receiver. Your gun is not broken. Your paperwork is. From 20 feet away, same stop, same mark. The system shows no discrepancy. Then why is the addendum missing?
Addendum found. Configuration warning.
And if you are wrong, then the evidence will prove it. Verification crew, stand by.
Before the weapon answered, the story jumped back 57 minutes, when one overlooked detail changed everything. The failure had begun the previous week, when damaged carrying handle hardware forced the crew to transfer a barrel assembly from another training set. The replacement carried a valid service tag and passed visual inspection. What no one verified was whether its complete configuration history matched this particular receiver. By late morning at the fictional Stone Creek Training Annex, the M2, a 1.50 caliber machine gun, had failed every cleared function check for 6 hours. Its action moved smoothly until the final fraction of travel, then stopped with the same hard hesitation. The supervised crew confirmed that it was unloaded, secured all ammunition at a separate holding point, inspected the visible components, and followed the approved checks. Nothing appeared cracked, bent, or missing. Still, no responsible range officer would authorize firing while the cause remained unknown. Staff Sergeant Kyle Mercer requested a replacement receiver. First Lieutenant Ethan Brooks postponed an afternoon maintenance demonstration, but the approaching evaluation team kept pressure on every decision. The faster the clock moved, the more certain Kyle became that the receiver itself had failed. 84-year-old Walter Hayes arrived that morning as a registered guest of the Annex Historical Program. A scheduling error left him behind the yellow visitor boundary with a sealed envelope of released maintenance notes and a weathered canvas bag. He crossed no line, handled no equipment, and claimed no authority. He simply watched the crew repeat the same failure. Minutes later, Lance Corporal Noah Reed was requesting the full transfer packet at Walter's suggestion. That request mattered because the current service tag answered only whether the transferred assembly had passed its own inspection. It did not answer whether that assembly belonged with an early conversion receiver. Kyle returned carrying the maintenance binder, and Ethan brought the electronic record. The recent entries looked reassuring until Noah reached the older conversion pages. One reference day, technical addendum that was absent from both the paper packet and its electronic copy. Every visible component looked correct, yet the history connecting them stopped one page too soon. The records clerk began searching archives no one on the range had opened in years. As the silent gun remained tagged and safely pointed downrange, the crew stopped debating whether Walter had earned the right to question them. A harder question had replaced it. What warning had disappeared with that missing page? The recovered addendum did not identify a broken receiver or a defective barrel assembly. It described a limited compatibility issue involving certain early M2A1 receiver conversions and assemblies transferred from other sets. Both components could remain serviceable on their own, but the combined configuration required an additional verification before use. The warning matched the range failure with unsettling precision. If the action hesitated at the same position and the locking indicator stopped short, the weapon had to remain out of service until a qualified small arms repairer compared the complete configuration with approved data. Noah read the summary while Kyle followed it on the tablet. The receiver Kyle planned to replace was not proven broken. The transferred assembly was not necessarily defective. The unverified relationship between them was the real problem. Kyle asked whether 6 hours had been lost because a single page never migrated into the current packet. Walter said the missing page was only half the failure. The other half was assuming that two individually accepted components automatically created an accepted system. Fixing the weapon without correcting that assumption would merely preserve the next mistake. The records clerk forwarded the addendum to the unit armorer and the maintenance evaluation team already traveling to Stone Creek. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Donovan ordered the M2A1 to remain cleared, tagged, and untouched until qualified personnel arrived. Ethan canceled the original demonstration. Kyle reconfirmed ammunition separation and the cold range status. Only then did anyone ask whether the weapon could still fire that afternoon. The answer depended on the current repair authority, a complete inspection, and a new range window. Walter refused to let the deadline become permission. The label on Walter's document bag identified him as a retired Marine gunnery sergeant and former civilian small arms quality specialist. Kyle's posture changed when he read it, but Walter redirected his attention to the evidence. A resume could explain experience. It could not move a witness mark or replace an approved publication. Walter also rejected the growing idea that he had diagnosed the fault from sound alone. He had combined a repeatable hesitation, an early conversion reference, a transferred assembly, and a missing document. Experience had not given him the answer. It had helped him choose the next question. At 34 minutes, the crew possessed a documented explanation but no authority to alter the configuration. A government utility truck appeared at the far end of the access road, carrying the people empowered to decide whether the silent weapon would receive one final test. While the vehicle approached, the human failure became harder for Kyle to ignore. Noah admitted that he had noticed the unusual hesitation during the morning checks and mentioned it once. Kyle had dismissed the concern because the individual inspection results appeared acceptable. The missing record had concealed the technical relationship. Rank and impatience had made the clue easier to silence. Kyle began an apology, but Walter stopped him. First, the crew had to make the weapon safe and the record honest. Feelings could wait until the work no longer depended on them. Noah retrieved the approved publications and established a clean documentation table. Kyle photographed the incomplete witness mark alignment. Ethan told the visiting officers that the demonstration would become a controlled verification event or be postponed entirely. No one argued with the decision. Walter remained outside the work boundary with his worn notebook and sealed archive envelope. He explained that the material came from the early M2A1 fielding period, when he had worked near specialists who recorded recurring problems before. Incomplete memories could turn them into folklore. For part of his Marine career, he had worked in an armory. Later, he became a civilian repairer and quality specialist at a depot. The titles changed, but the obligation to distinguish a clue from proof never did. Noah asked whether the old notebook contained a solution. Walter answered that it contained questions, dates, and references, not authority. If the approved source contradicted his memory, the source would win. That answer unsettled Kyle more than any boast could have. Walter was not trying to defeat the current crew with old knowledge. He was forcing them to use their own system completely. The utility truck stopped near the control shelter. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Donovan stepped out with Staff Sergeant Alicia Grant, a qualified small arms repairer from the Regional Support Activity, and 2 members of the evaluation team. They brought no ceremony and made no promise that the weapon would fire. At 34 minutes, the tagged M2A1 still sat silent. The crew had found a plausible relationship, not a completed repair. Before the range clock reached 1 hour, the authorized team would have to determine whether the overlooked page had identified the true cause, or merely produced another convincing theory. The approaching vehicle pulled Walter into a memory he had spent years learning to describe without turning it into legend. He had first worked around the Legacy M2 during his Marine service, when headspace and timing demanded careful manual attention and shortcuts could damage equipment or injure people. His instructors taught him to use the correct gauges, follow the publication, and ask for help before confidence became improvisation. Decades later, after leaving active duty, Walter joined a depot as a civilian small arms repairer and eventually became a quality specialist. By then, the M2A1 conversion promised a safer system with a quick-change barrel and fixed headspace and timing. The improvement removed a demanding operator adjustment, but it also created a new responsibility. Configuration records had to be exact. A safer design could still be undermined by incomplete transfer data, old assumptions, or components accepted separately without the required combined check. Walter remembered one early fielding week when a training gun behaved much like the M2A1 at Stone Creek. Every component had passed its separate inspection, yet the locking indicator stopped slightly short, and the cleared action hesitated at the same point every time. A hurried supervisor blamed the receiver and requested a replacement. Walter's mentor, Master Gunnery Sergeant Samuel Price, asked a simpler question. What changed immediately before the failure? The barrel assembly had changed. Price requested the complete conversion record. An addendum revealed that a limited group of early receiver upgrades required an additional compatibility verification after barrel assemblies moved between sets. A qualified team installed the approved matching component, verified it, and documented the relationship the packet had omitted. Walter wrote the lesson in his notebook that evening. When two inspected parts fail together, inspect the assumption that joined them. Price read the sentence and crossed out one word. He replaced inspect with verify. Inspection looks at what is present, he told Walter. Verification proves it belongs. That distinction followed Walter for the rest of his career. Later, he helped teams recognize similar gaps and donated his notes because the lesson belonged to the institution, not to him. The memory ended when the utility truck stopped near the control shelter. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Donovan stepped out with Staff Sergeant Alicia Grant, a qualified small arms repairer from the Regional Support Activity, and two members of the scheduled evaluation team. He signed into range control, reviewed the cold range status, and received the maintenance packet before approaching the firing point. Walter stayed behind the visitor line. Donovan read the newly recovered addendum first, then examined the photograph of the witness mark position. Only after understanding the evidence did he look toward Walter. Gunnery Sergeant Hayes? Walter gave a small nod. Retired a long time ago. Donovan extended his hand across the open space beside the control line, not over it. You taught configuration control at the depot when I was a new warrant officer. Then you know better than to trust my memory without checking the record, Walter said. Donovan smiled once. That sounds like you. The Marines nearby straightened, but Walter turned their attention back toward the tagged M2A1. His memory is not the maintenance authority, he said. Your publication is. Donovan agreed. He asked Alicia to lead the inspection while Kyle and Noah observed. Walter would remain outside the work boundary and answer historical questions only. Ethan looked surprised that Donovan did not immediately invite the famous old specialist to take over. Walter noticed. The people authorized today must own today's work, he explained. Otherwise, all you learned is how to wait for an old man. Alicia verified the weapon's cleared status with a second qualified Marine, confirmed ammunition separation, and established the controlled maintenance area. She compared the receiver conversion marking, the barrel assembly record, and the recovered addendum. The evidence aligned. At 41 minutes after Walter had first requested the transfer record, the team possessed a testable explanation. What they still did not possess was permission to fire. Alicia began by repeating the failure under the approved cleared check procedure, while Donovan observed and Kyle read each required step. The same hesitation appeared at the same point. She stopped immediately, kept the M2A1 out of service, and documented the result. Walter watched from beyond the control line without leaning forward or offering instructions. He had already supplied the question. Now the current team had to supply the proof. Under the maintenance publication and the authority of the Regional Support Activity, Alicia removed the transferred assembly for comparison in the controlled work area. Its serviceability tag was legitimate. The recovered addendum, however, identified the early receiver conversion group and required a matching locking configuration that this transferred assembly did not provide. A nearly identical approved assembly from the unit's support stock carried the correct configuration for that receiver. The difference was subtle, but the records made it unambiguous. Kyle stared at the two tagged assemblies on separate padded surfaces. We checked the number family, he said. We never checked the conversion relationship. Alicia nodded. That is why configuration control exists. Walter did not add anything. Noah noticed his silence and understood that the old veteran was refusing to claim a victory that belonged to documented evidence. Alicia installed the approved matching assembly under the publication, using only authorized tools and required verification. One Marine performed the work, another checked it, Kyle updated the record, and Donovan let no deadline shorten a step. When the assembly was secured, its witness mark centered cleanly. Alicia repeated the cleared function check. The mechanism completed its travel with a smooth, decisive rhythm. The required confirmation matched the first. Noah released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Kyle looked toward Walter. That was it. Walter shook his head. That was the mechanical cause. Do not confuse it with the process failure. Ethan glanced at the incomplete electronic packet. The process failure was the missing addendum. Part of it, Walter said. The other part was treating laughter as leadership. You had a schedule problem, then turned a visitor into entertainment. That did not damage the weapon, but it made your team less willing to question you. The words landed harder because Walter delivered them without anger. One of the young Marines who had joked about the paperweight lowered his gaze. Noah spoke before the silence became evasive. I heard the hesitation this morning. I assumed Staff Sergeant Mercer had already considered it. Kyle looked at him. Did you mention it? Once. Kyle remembered. Noah had described the stop as different from a lubrication problem. Kyle had answered that the gauges were acceptable and moved on. I dismissed it, Kyle said. Walter nodded. Then the lesson is not that the oldest voice was right. The lesson is that evidence does not gain value from age or rank. Donovan closed the maintenance binder. The weapon has passed the required cleared checks. It has not yet passed a live-fire verification. The original demonstration time had been canceled, but range control reported that a short test window remained before the afternoon ceasefire. Donovan made no promise. He required Alicia to complete the post-maintenance inspection, confirm the updated record, and brief the range officer. A qualified crew would conduct any firing. Walter would remain in the observation area. Ethan asked whether the visiting officers should be called back. Donovan answered no. This is not a show. It is a verification. Walter's expression showed approval. The Marines prepared without hurry. Ammunition remained at the holding point until range control authorized movement. The M2A1 stayed pointed downrange. Noah, already qualified on the system, was assigned as gunner. Kyle would supervise the crew, and Alicia would monitor the post-maintenance test. Walter watched Noah check his protective equipment and review the commands. Nervous? Walter asked. A little, Noah admitted. Good. Respect for a powerful system should survive familiarity. He did not offer tactical advice or tell Noah how to fire. He pointed toward the checklist in Noah's hand. Let the procedure carry the parts of the moment that excitement might drop. 48 minutes had passed since the Marines had left Walter beside what they called a broken gun. The mechanism now worked, the record had been corrected, and a qualified team was requesting permission for a controlled test. Then range control answered over the radio. The short verification window was approved. The range changed character the moment it went hot. The observation area was confirmed clear, the backstop and target line were verified, and every person moved to an assigned position. Ammunition came forward only after the range officer authorized it. Walter stood behind protective barriers with the evaluation visitors, wearing hearing protection provided by Noah. His canvas bag remained closed at his feet. He expected no applause. The M2A1 now belonged entirely to the current crew. Kyle supervised the sequence with a seriousness that had been missing when he joked. About the old security guard, Alicia monitored the weapon from the designated safe position. Ethan relayed range status without pressing anyone to hurry. Noah settled behind the gun and repeated the commands he had practiced. The crew completed the required checks. The range officer issued the final authorization. Noah fired a short controlled verification burst into the approved impact area. The M2A1 answered with a deep, measured report that rolled across the empty range and returned from the distant berm. The gun cycled cleanly. Noah stopped on command. The crew held its positions while Alicia and Kyle observed the required pause and post-fire checks. Only after the range officer declared the line safe and the crew completed the clearing sequence did relief begin to show. The range clock marked 57 minutes from the moment Walter had been jokingly left to guard the broken 50. Within an hour, it had gone from an unexplained failure to a controlled, documented, successful firing. Walter had never crossed the maintenance boundary, never handled ammunition, never taken the gun away from its assigned crew, and never replaced procedure with memory. He had noticed a relationship, demanded the missing record, and allowed authorized Marines to prove the rest. Noah turned from the cleared gun, his face bright behind the restraint expected on a live-fire range. It worked. Walter removed one side of his hearing protection after receiving the all-clear. The crew worked, he corrected. The gun responded. Kyle walked toward the observation barrier, but stopped on the other side. Walter had chosen to remain behind the boundary because it mattered. Sir, Kyle began, I owe you an apology. Walter studied him. You owe one to Noah first. Kyle turned. In front of the crew and without softening his language, he admitted that Noah had raised the unusual hesitation during the morning inspection and that he had dismissed the observation because the individual readings looked acceptable. He also admitted that his jokes had taught younger Marines that agreeing with the staff sergeant mattered more than examining a clue. "I should have repeated the concern," he said. Walter shook his head. "A junior Marine should speak clearly. A leader must make speaking clearly worth the risk." Ethan stepped forward next. "I approved the tone because I was worried about the schedule. I treated you as though your age made you harmless enough to mock." Walter met his eyes. "My background explains why I recognized the pattern. It is not why I deserve basic respect before you knew it." Donovan remained silent. He did not use his rank to manufacture remorse or threaten punishment. Accountability belonged to the people who had made the choices. Walter continued, "The next visitor may have no title, no notebook, and no correct answer. Your standard cannot depend on whether someone later proves useful." Ethan nodded. "Understood." "Understanding is what changes tomorrow," Walter replied. Behind them, Alicia began the post-fire inspection and updated the maintenance entry. Kyle ordered the recovered addendum attached to both the paper and electronic records. Noah asked whether Walter's notebook should be cited. Walter answered no. "Cite the approved source. My notebook helped you find it." "That is not the same thing." As the afternoon wind moved across the range, the Marines began to understand why Walter's quiet correction felt larger than the sound they had just heard. He had not shown them that old knowledge defeated modern procedure. He had shown them that good procedure grows stronger when people remain humble enough to question an incomplete record. The post-fire inspection confirmed normal operation, but Donovan refused to let success turn the afternoon into a victory story. He moved the group to the shaded briefing area and asked Alicia to explain the event from the beginning. She described the cleared failure, the transferred barrel assembly, the incomplete conversion packet, the compatibility addendum, the authorized configuration correction, and the controlled verification burst. She did not say Walter had fixed the gun by listening to it. She said Walter had connected 4 observations and requested the missing source. Walter nodded once. "That version can teach someone." Donovan then asked Noah to describe the human failure. Noah glanced toward Kyle before answering. "I noticed the repeatable hesitation but did not press the concern after it was dismissed. Staff Sergeant Mercer trusted the component statuses without asking whether the configuration relationship had been verified. The lieutenant let schedule pressure turn the problem into a joke. The missing page made the technical error possible. Our behavior made it harder to challenge." Ethan accepted the account without correction. Kyle did the same. Only then did Donovan discuss Walter's background. He told the Marines that Walter had served more than 20 years in uniform, retiring as a gunnery sergeant after assignments involving crew-served weapons and armory supervision. He later spent nearly 3 decades as a civilian repairer and quality specialist, helping depots and fielding teams translate recurring maintenance problems into reliable procedures. He had not designed the M2A1, and no single inspection standard belonged to him. His contribution was quieter. He kept careful records, challenged unsupported assumptions, and taught younger specialists to distinguish a clue from proof. "Some of the people he trained became the people who trained me," Donovan said. The younger Marines looked toward Walter with new respect. Walter did not reject it, but he corrected its foundation. "That history explains why Chief Warrant Officer Donovan remembers me," he said. "It does not turn today into a story about rank. I was still the same person when you called me a security guard." Kyle absorbed the words without looking away. "Yes, sir." Walter opened the sealed envelope for the first time and handed it to the annex training chief, who had arrived during the test. Inside were photographs, correspondence, and copies of fielding notes already reviewed for archival release. One photograph showed Walter during the M2A1 conversion era, standing at a depot classroom beside a group of repairers. Another showed Master Gunnery Sergeant Samuel Price years earlier, pointing toward a maintenance binder rather than a weapon. On the back, Walter had written, "The answer is not in the oldest man. It is in the best supported question." Noah read the sentence twice. "Did he teach you that?" "He taught me enough to write it," Walter said. The training chief asked whether Walter would allow the annex to display the notebook beside the photographs. Walter agreed on one condition. The recovered addendum and the corrected local process had to be displayed with it. "Do not build a shrine to a personality," he said. "Show the chain from observation to record to authorized action." Donovan asked Kyle what he would change before the next training day. Kyle answered carefully. The unit would review transferred assemblies against full configuration history, verify that referenced addenda were present in electronic packets, and add a prompt requiring the crew to record repeatable differences between commanded movement and actual movement. He would also establish a brief in which the most junior crew member reported first, before rank shaped the room. Ethan added that visitor treatment and technical credibility would be separated. Every guest would remain within access rules, but nobody would be mocked for age, clothing, or status. Walter listened. "Those are promises," he said. "What makes them real?" Kyle looked toward the maintenance table. "Names, deadlines, and verification." He assigned Noah to help audit the current training pool under Alicia's supervision. Ethan set a next-day review time and placed himself on the attendance list. Donovan required a written corrective action report within 48 hours. Walter finally accepted Kyle's apology, but not as a clean ending. "I accept that you understand what you did," he said. "Whether the apology becomes true depends on what your Marines experience after I leave." Kyle nodded. The distinction gave him work instead of absolution. Beyond the briefing shelter, the M2A1 rested cleared and tagged after its test. It had fired within an hour, exactly as the range clock recorded. Yet the most consequential result could not be measured in minutes. A staff sergeant had learned that certainty could silence evidence. A lieutenant had learned that schedule pressure revealed character rather than excusing conduct. And a young Marine had learned that speaking once was an obligation, but building a culture that listened was a leader's responsibility. The next morning, Walter returned to Stone Creek because he had promised the training chief an inventory of the donated records. He expected a quiet hour in the archive room. Instead, he found the weapons platoon assembled beside a whiteboard before the range opened. Kyle stood at the front without a prepared speech. On the board, he had written 3 questions. What changed? What evidence contradicts our assumption? What record connects the parts? Noah sat in the first row with the corrected configuration packet. Alicia joined by video. Donovan observed from the back, and Ethan sat among the Marines. Kyle began by replaying his own failure. He described the moment Noah mentioned the hesitation, the decision to dismiss it, the joke about the old volunteer, and the way several younger Marines laughed because the staff sergeant had signaled that laughter was safe. He called it a leadership error. Then he asked Noah to present the technical chain. Noah used photographs, the recovered addendum, and the corrected entry, focusing on reasoning rather than controlled procedures. The individual components appeared serviceable. The combined configuration required verification. The incomplete packet concealed that relationship. The crew's assumptions delayed the correct question. When he finished, Kyle asked the most junior Marine in the room what still seemed unclear. The young private hesitated, then pointed out that other archive packets might also reference missing pages. Kyle assigned the question for review. Walter watched from the doorway until Noah noticed him. The room stood automatically, but Walter waved them back to their seats. "If this class needs me standing at the front, yesterday did not work," he said. During the break, Ethan approached Walter with 2 cups of coffee. "I used to think command presence meant never letting uncertainty show," he said. Walter accepted 1 cup. "People can smell hidden uncertainty. They just learn not to name it." Ethan looked toward Noah, who was helping another Marine trace a document reference. "I nearly taught them that questions were disloyal. Then teach them the difference between challenge and disrespect," Walter replied. "A disciplined question protects the mission. A joke at someone's expense protects only the person telling it." Ethan nodded. By noon, the audit found 2 more electronic packets with inactive links to supporting pages. Neither weapon showed a discrepancy, and both remained controlled under normal maintenance status, while records specialists corrected the files. The discovery exposed a wider record-keeping weakness before another failure forced the issue. Donovan credited the unit for finding it. Walter redirected the praise toward the private who had asked the question. "Experience started yesterday's search," he said. "A new Marine extended it today. That is how knowledge survives." The training chief later brought Walter into the archive room. The display proposal included the corrected local procedure and a statement explaining that Walter had remained outside the maintenance boundary while authorized personnel performed the work and live-fire test. Walter approved. He removed 1 item before final transfer, a small card bearing Samuel Price's handwriting. The card read, "Do not become so proud of being right that people become afraid to learn beside you." As he prepared to leave, Noah found him near the parking area. "I wrote something in my notebook," the young Marine said. "May I show you?" The first page contained no heroic quotation. It held a simple sequence: observe, verify, document, teach. Walter smiled. Leave space after teach. For what? Listen again. Noah added the words. Their ordinary habits would prevent emergencies. A week later, Stone Creek held the demonstration that had been canceled. Walter did not attend. The decision surprised Kyle until he read the note Walter left with the training chief. "If the process works only while I am watching, it does not work." Noah served as gunner under the same range controls used during the verification test. Alicia reviewed the maintenance status. Kyle supervised without rushing the crew. Ethan told the visiting officers that the schedule would follow safety, not the other way around. The M2A1 completed its checks and fired its planned demonstration without interruption. No one described the gun as cured by an old master. The briefing credited the recovered configuration addendum, the qualified repair team, the corrected records, and the crew that followed the approved process. When one visitor asked how the missing relationship had been found, Noah answered, "A retired Marine noticed that our evidence disagreed with our assumption. He made us prove which one was wrong." That explanation honored Walter without turning him into magic. Months passed. The annex created a short case study titled The Missing Relationship. It began with the technical facts, included the human factors, and ended with the sentence Walter had insisted upon. Respect is required before expertise is proven. The case study spread to other training activities because it addressed more than one weapon system. Incomplete records, transferred components, schedule pressure, and rank-shaped silence could appear anywhere. Kyle's platoon adopted the junior first observation brief. At first, the practice felt awkward. Senior Marines were accustomed to framing the problem before others spoke. Over time, the order revealed details that had previously disappeared in side agreement. Some observations proved irrelevant. A few were wrong. None were mocked. Kyle learned that listening did not weaken authority. It made authority less dependent on pretending. Ethan kept the next day review on his calendar even after the corrective report closed. Once a month, he asked the platoon to identify a moment when procedure and outcome had disagreed. The answers were rarely dramatic. A mislabeled container. A delayed inspection entry. A tool returned to the wrong shadow board. Small contradictions became opportunities to correct habits before risk grew. Noah eventually became a staff sergeant. On his first day leading a crew-served weapons class, he carried the notebook Walter had seen. He did not repeat the story as proof that young Marines needed old men to save them. He told his students that Walter's greatest contribution was refusing to touch a weapon he was not currently authorized to repair. He had respected boundaries, requested records, and allowed the responsible team to own the solution. Knowledge without discipline becomes ego, Noah told them. Discipline without curiosity becomes routine. We need both. Years later, Walter returned to the annex for a small archive open house. His hair had thinned further, his walk had slowed, and the faded olive jacket remained unchanged. The display contained no medals and no photograph of a general saluting him. It showed the incomplete packet, the recovered addendum, the centered witness mark, the corrected record, and a picture of Noah's crew after the controlled test. Walter stood quietly before it until Kyle, now retired, approached from beside the archive shelves. "You were right about tomorrow," Kyle said. The apology took longer than the words. Walter looked at the display. "That is true of most worthwhile repairs." They shook hands. There was no audience waiting for the moment and no need for one. Before Walter left, a group of young Marines entered with an instructor. One of them noticed the old canvas bag and asked whether he was the man from the case study. Walter considered denying it, then decided the truth could be useful if kept in proportion. "I am one of the people in it," he said. The Marine pointed toward the photograph of the M2A1. "Did you really get it firing within an hour?" Walter smiled. "The team did. But you found the problem." "I found a missing question." He nodded toward the corrected packet. "They found the answer, proved it, and made sure the next crew would not have to rediscover it." The instructor called the class forward. Walter adjusted the strap of his canvas bag and walked toward the exit. Behind him, the young Marine remained at the display, reading the final line twice. The most powerful machine on the range had made the loudest sound that afternoon. The quietest lesson lasted longer. No person should have to prove extraordinary value before being treated with ordinary dignity, and no institution stays strong unless every generation remains humble enough to listen.